Welcome to the Rocky Mountain MS Center's webinar series. This series is designed to give people with MS information to empower them to make the best choices for their lifelong brain health. I'm Kelsey Morrow, Education Manager at the Rocky Mountain MS Center, and I would like to thank the pharmaceutical companies who have provided patient support for this program. Thank you to EMD Serono, Genentech, and Novartis Pharmaceuticals. This speaker series is just one piece of our education programming. We have a variety of formats available to you, including both in-person and online options, with most of our programs also available on demand through our YouTube channel. Some of the most recent videos that we've posted are the presentations from the Fall Education Summit, which covered the differences and similarities between NMO and MS, research updates, addressing mobility concerns, the concept of PURA, and cognition. There's also an archive of videos from Conversations on MS, which is a 90-minute town hall style Q&A with MS specialists, neurologists from the Rocky Mountain MS Center, and includes a clickable index of topics. Our January webinar topic is Cognitive Function in MS. We announce upcoming educational opportunities through our mailing list, our Facebook page, and you can sign up for notifications through Eventbrite. All of our education programs are free of charge to anyone interested. Today's presentation will be on managing the financial risks of disability. Our presenter is Tom Stewart. Tom Stewart is a physician assistant who has treated patients with MS for 20 years. For the last 15 of those years, he has also worked as a disability attorney, helping people with MS and other chronic diseases access Social Security and private disability benefits. He is interested in helping people with MS and other chronic diseases understand how to protect themselves in the event that they begin to struggle or can no longer participate in the workforce. This webinar features a lot of important information. If you missed something on a slide or want to hear it again, we are recording this webinar and it will be archived on our website at www.mscenter.org. So you can replay it at any time. All live viewers will get the recording automatically sent to them. You will also receive a link to our evaluation survey. Please take a few moments to fill this out as it helps us improve future programming. We'll reserve time at the end to answer questions from the audience. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A box on Zoom, and I do recommend submitting those questions early rather than waiting till the very end. And then we'll answer as many as time allows. And today's presentation is for educational purposes only. With that, I'll turn it over to Tom.
Thank you, Kelsey. So over the course of my career, I've seen many of the struggles that some people with chronic diseases such as MS face when their symptoms interfere with their ability to work. And over the years, I've also seen how a little advanced planning might help to mitigate some of those challenges. So this brief talk is intended primarily to help people with MS who are still in the workforce plan for the possibility that their symptoms may someday cause them to lose that ability. Of course, this information may also be helpful to people who are already in the process of trying to apply for disability benefits. Before getting into the details of this, I want to talk about the concern I have when presenting information about disability to people with MS or other chronic diseases. I want to avoid the implication that all or even most people with MS are necessarily going to lose the ability to work. I do not believe that at all. On the other hand, it's sobering to know that approximately 1 in 4 of all 20-year-olds will lose the ability to work prior to retirement age. This statistic is not restricted to people with a chronic disease. It refers to all 20-year-olds. So the point is that it's a good idea for everyone to know how to protect themselves should they lose the ability to work, not just those with MS. My intention is not to discourage anyone with this information. Instead, ideally, is to empower you with knowledge and strategies to safeguard your financial well-being. The most important disability program for people with a work history by far is the Social Security Disability Insurance Program. Think about what would be lost if you had to stop working due to an illness. Of course, there are many factors to consider, such as the loss of identity and social interactions, but the main damaging consequence of losing the ability to work, most likely, would be the loss of income and often medical insurance. Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI, can substantially mitigate the consequences of losing the ability to work by providing a modest replacement income ranging from $1,000 a month for low earners to about $3,000 per month for high earners, and by providing medical insurance in the form of Medicare. With this slide, I want to go over Social Security eligibility rules. In other words, who is protected by SSDI if they become and can prove that they are disabled. You are eligible for Social Security disability benefits if you've worked long enough, paid Social Security taxes, and importantly, worked recently enough, that is, within the last 5 years. There are some exceptions, however. For example, some public employees and railroad workers pay into analogous systems. For example, teachers in Colorado don't pay Social Security taxes, but instead pay into an analogous system known as PARA. A problem can arise when people move back and forth between these various programs, sometimes winding up unprotected by either. So be cautious when moving between these systems. People who have not worked in the last 5 years, as I mentioned, may or have worked only intermittently over the last 5 years, as sometimes happens among those with chronic diseases, may not be eligible for SSDI. This can be a problem, especially for stay-at-home moms and dads, for example. If you have a child and choose to stay at home with her until she starts first grade and then become unable to return to the workforce at all due to a disability, you will no longer be eligible for SSDI, even if you can prove you're disabled, because you haven't worked recently enough. So the rules are complex for people who have been in and out of the workforce over the last 5 years. So when in doubt about eligibility, call the Social Security Administration to find out if you're currently insured for purposes of disability benefits. So let's imagine a scenario. Let's say you've been white knuckling at work for the last year and your boss has begun to notice that you're no longer able to keep up with expectations and it's getting hard for you to even just show up every day. Let's make this example a little bit more extreme and assume you don't have a spouse and don't have private disability benefits. And in my experience, this is not a rare situation. You might want to apply for benefits and stop working only if you're found disabled. Unfortunately, it does not work that way. If someone is working for more than what the Social Security Administration considers to be substantial gainful activity, she is not disabled no matter how severe her symptoms. In 2023, SGA, substantial gainful activity, is $1,470 per month before taxes. If you're earning that much, then you're not disabled, again, no matter how severe your symptoms are. For most people, the SGA rule means that they have to stop working before applying for disability benefits. You might want to know how much money you would get if you become disabled. Actually, I'm sorry, I already covered that. You might want to know how quickly you can get that income. It's important to know that the best case is that you'll get your first payment after a 5-month exclusion. So your best case for receiving a check, because of the way Social Security counts the months involved, is 6 months after you stop working. And obviously this is a big challenge. Most people can't live by themselves without an income for 6 months. And this is the best case scenario. You should know that there may be a delay for up to 2 years before your benefits may begin. So I think this slide teaches a lot. The SSDI, or the Social Security Disability Insurance Program, is administered by the Social Security Administration, a federal agency. The federal agency contracts with a state agency known as Disability Determination Services, or DDS, which is the agency that makes the initial determination regarding disability. As you can see, the odds are not good. This is with an initial application. DDS, the state agency, only awards about 30% of applicants right away. And these are the people who can get paid 6 months after they stop working. You can see that the majority, 67 or 70% of the time, claims are denied, and then people have to request reconsideration here. Again, through that same state agency, you're asking them to reconsider your claim. And this can take easily another 6 months. And you can see here that about 90% of the time, claims are denied at the state agency level with reconsideration. And if your claim is denied here, then you have to request a hearing before an administrative law judge. And then it goes back to the federal agency so that the administrative law judge, or ALJ, will be able to hear your claim. But this is going to take an extra 9 or 10 months at least. So you can easily see how this time could add up to 2 years. The less bad news is that if somebody is awarded benefits, say here, it takes 2 years. I mean, of course, there's no guarantee of getting an award at all. But if you're found disabled, the judge has to make another decision, which is when your disability began. Often, it's all the way back here. So you wind up getting paid for this in many cases for this period of time. It just takes 2 years. And again, who can manage for 2 years without an income? So here's a summary of the main points so far. Most workers are eligible for SSDI benefits if they become disabled and they can prove it. However, if you've not worked for the last 5 years, you may no longer be protected. Obtaining SSDI benefits can take a very long time. Typically, it takes a minimum of 6 months, and often it can extend to 2 years. And this timeline can be especially relevant, and it's harder for people who are younger than 50. So it's especially likely for people under 50 that it may take up to 2 years. As a result of the challenges of accessing SSDI benefits, I highly recommend obtaining private disability insurance through your employer if possible, if it's offered, and it's not always offered. And I say get it through your employer because if for somebody who has MS, it's going to be very difficult getting it any other way, just through the marketplace, because of the pre-existing condition. But even if you do get it through your employer, you do have a potential pre-existing problem. There's a pre-existing disability clause often in place, and it prevents recovery for pre-existing conditions like MS for the first 12 months of employment. And then typically that restriction goes away, but you do have to make it for 12 months in a new job before typically you'd be protected by a disability policy. So one of the most critical factor in the success of a disability claim is having a robust and well-documented medical record that supports your disability. Make sure your medical history accurately reflects the severity of your condition and the limitations it imposes on your ability to work. The last point about the medical record is critical, and I'm going to dive into more detail here. A diagnosis, I think a lot of people with MS thinks that the diagnosis is a disability, and for purposes of Social Security, it's not. A diagnosis does not automatically qualify someone for disability without severe symptoms and limitations. And a determination of disability, whether through the Social Security Administration or through a private insurance company, will largely depend on the extent to which your medical record conveys your severe symptoms and limitations. The truth doesn't matter, the medical record does. A physician or other clinician's language stating that you're disabled doesn't help at all with a Social Security claim. A physician's description of your specific limitations, on the other hand, is very helpful. And that's your medical history. And so are examination findings, of course. So your neurologist cannot include information about your symptoms and limitations unless you specifically tell him or her about it. If your doctor doesn't write about your limitations, Social Security Administration won't know about it other than by your self-report, which probably won't be enough. It's important to know the difference between symptoms and limitations. Symptoms generally describe your experience living with the disease. So an example would be fatigue. If you experience fatigue, it's important that you mention the symptom to your doctor and that he or she puts it into your office visit notes. But this is not enough, most likely, to pursue a disability claim. You should also do your best to make sure your limitations are documented. Your limitations are the so what of your symptom. For example, a limitation related to fatigue might be needing to take a 1-hour rest or nap in the middle of the day, or to take multiple breaks throughout the day after even simple activities like taking a shower. Another limitation related to upper extremity incoordination. So in other words, it's not enough simply to say, oh, you have trouble using your hands and fingers. It would be better to explain that it's so severe that it's difficult to use a phone or to type for more than short amounts of time. Don't neglect symptoms and limitations that may be embarrassing, such as urinary incontinence or bowel incontinence. And specifically how many, I mean, this bears on the need to take breaks also, right? If you have urinary problems, that means you have to go to the bathroom and it takes you 10 minutes every hour. That would also be important to try to communicate to your doctor so it's included in your medical record. Be sure to describe any difficulty with your activities of daily living, which they include dressing, bathing, toileting, and eating, or your instrument. This would be more typical. People are independent. They don't have trouble with the ADLs, but they do with their IADLs, or their instrumental activities of daily living, such as doing the shopping, housework, laundry, medication management, and meal preparation. And another example would be a cognitive problem. It's probably not a good idea to say I have difficulty thinking, or I have cognitive problems. It would be more helpful to include the so what of it. So, for example, my cognitive problems are so severe that I can't concentrate for more than 20 minutes at a time, or whatever the truth is. Other limitations that would be important to convey, because they would significantly reduce the ability, your ability to work and improve the likelihood of a successful claim, Social Security disability claim, would be difficulty with managing more than simple instructions due to your cognitive problems. As I go through this list, of course, it's not a one-size-fits-all list. It's just to provide examples of the kinds of things that you should mention to your doctor where applicable, so that might be included in your medical record. Another example would be difficulty responding appropriately to criticism and correction, maybe due to depression or anxiety, handling minor routine changes in plans, or stress, again, due to anxiety or depression, and an inability to manage fast-paced situations because of cognitive problems, fatigue, difficulty interacting appropriately with others due to depression, difficulty using hands. We already kind of talked about this, such as putting small parts together, typing, using a telephone. And then another one would be, that's particularly relevant for people with MS, would be just symptom variability. As many people with MS describe good and bad days, and there are bad days when their symptoms are particularly severe and not an MS exacerbation. Of course, that can happen, but I'm just saying that there's some people who experience so-called bad days when they spend most of their day in their own home, or even sometimes in bed. It's good to describe that and to describe the frequency of that too, because you're ultimately, and I'll touch on this again, your ability to work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week on a reliable and consistent basis is what's important. And if you have some so-called bad days when you need to be home, that would create an excessive absenteeism in the workforce. And that is a major limitation for a lot of people if it's in the medical record. It's also important to see appropriate specialists. So for cognitive problems, it's a good idea to get evaluated by a neuropsychologist. If you have walking problems or gait problems, it's a good idea to see a physical therapist. Specialty care, of course, if you have MS, that would mean a neurologist. For mental health problems, see a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a social worker. And, I should include that on this list because they do the majority of care. The challenges, unfortunately, despite their expertise, social workers who don't have PhDs and aren't MDs their opinions about your function will be given less weight than these other specialists will by the Social Security Administration. If you have bladder problems, maybe if it's severe enough, consider a urology referral. Fatigue is the hardest one to have recorded. Sometimes a functional capacities evaluation with a physical therapist or occupational therapist is the best way to do that. So what does Social Security mean by disability? And I've already touched on this, but I'm going to spell it out a little bit more clearly. And it's a complex topic. And so it's of course it's more than is on this already complicated slide, but at least this is a good starting point. So your limitations, you have to have limitations that have lasted or are expected to last for at least 12 months. So in other words, of course, MS would qualify, but maybe not if it's an MS in general, but maybe not if it's an MS exacerbation. So a lot of times people recover from those, right? They don't last 12 months. And so it's not, if you have an MS exacerbation that makes you disabled for 3 months, it's not the basis for a Social Security disability claim. Another way to prove disability, maybe the easiest cases are related to severe physical disability. So for example, if someone needs bilateral support or a wheelchair for mobility, and it's clear from the medical record, he or she should be found disabled right away with their initial application, meaning 6 months. Technically, this is known as a listing level impairment. And then there are other categories, and again, these are complicated, but the rules change for people who are 50, as I've already mentioned, that a different analysis is used for people who are 50 and over, if they are limited to sedentary work. And I've got sedentary work defined here, standing and walking, whoops, I don't, only 2 hours, I should say, in an 8-hour day. And for those people who are 50 and not capable of walking more than that, and they have cognitive problems such that they're capable of only simple, repetitive, and routine tasks, they would be found disabled. And in that, just to emphasize the importance of this, is somebody who was under 50 would not be disabled with these same findings because there are jobs such a person would be able to do. Special rule for 50-year-olds and 55-year-olds, if you're limited to light work, standing and walking only 6 hours per day, and lifting 10 pounds frequently and 20 pounds occasionally, very technical information, but if you're 55, it's easier to prove disability even than when you're 50, because if you're capable of only light work, which is a less demanding standard of disability than the sedentary one, and capable, again, of only simple routine and repetitive tasks, you'll be found disabled. For people of all ages, and what mostly winds up being the argument, for people who go to a hearing before an administrative law judge, it's being unable to work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week on a reliable and consistent basis. And if you remember all of my earlier points about needing to take naps or breaks or having good or bad days, that's why that's so important that this is in your medical record, because again, the truth is not what matters, it's the medical record that does. I just want to add a little information about Medicare. From the date that Social Security finds someone disabled, there is a 30-month waiting period for Medicare to start. This is clearly bad policy. The 30-month wait was thought by Congress to be acceptable because of COBRA rights, but often paying for COBRA is prohibitively expensive. During this period, disabled people have to find other solutions, such as getting insurance through a working spouse or through the Affordable Care Act, which would include Medicaid in many states. So I've been talking about preparing for disability or having to leave the workforce due to a medical problem. Although this is sometimes necessary, of course, it's never an ideal outcome. There are a variety of tools to help with this, to help people stay in the workforce despite their problems, rather than having to leave entirely. For example, the Family Medical Leave Act, which generally applies only if you work for an employer with 50 or more employees, can protect your job if you're struggling with absences. Although your job would be protected in this situation, it's often unpaid. Some states, including Colorado, have enacted legislation that protects almost all employees, not just those that work for large employers, and also provides for paid time off. In Colorado, this is a sea change in the protections afforded to people with MS, and it begins in 2024. Other protections are related to the Americans with Disability Act, which requires employers to provide accommodations to their employees in certain circumstances. And finally, some people have access to disability policies that would allow them to stay in the workforce on a part-time basis while getting paid, often at 60%, the time they are no longer able to work due to their disability. I've already done a short presentation on those topics, and I'll let Kelsey provide a little more detail at the end of the talk about how you can access that if you're interested. I'd like to thank the Rocky Mountain MS Center for years of support. This is my number for people who would like to have, who have individual problems. I'm happy to do one-on-one consultations for free for people who call that number. And with that, I'll just say thank you for your attention and turn it back over to Kelsey.
Thank you, Tom. We did have a bunch of great questions submitted at registration, so I'll go ahead and get started with those, and then anyone watching now can submit their questions through the Q&A box. On the timing of things, are there any suggestions if someone has filed for SSDI, been denied, and has now appealed it? Is there anything they can do in the meantime, or is it just a waiting game?
Okay, I'm going to go back to this slide just so that everyone else understands the challenges here that is being experienced by the person who wrote the question, right? So, 6 months, maybe another 6 months, right? And then maybe another year. Okay, that's actually optimistic. There are people who are here. I have a client who has not heard anything for 18 months. There's not a lot to do. But what I advise people who are, whose case is taking longer than it should, again, you can't complain that it takes 6 months. That's just the way it is. But if it's taking 18 months or a year, it's time to call your congressperson, and sometimes they can advocate on people's behalf to get things moving when things get stuck. That's one potential answer. And then occasionally, for MS, this doesn't apply, but other people have, like Huntington's, there's something called the compassionate allowance claim, which for very severely, ultimately lethal diseases like Huntington's, Social Security is supposed to expedite that. If you're about to be homeless or at risk for food or shelter insecurity, if that can be documented, that's supposed to get your case prioritized. And finally, this last example I can think of is for people who have a 100% disability rating through the VA. They should be able to expedite their hearings as well.
For a hearing, do you need an attorney?
I think so. It's a pretty formal process. Some people would argue, again, this is a handy graph for this question, and I think that's reasonable to apply, especially for someone with a very obvious claim for disability. And by that, I mean, it can be seen, and there's an exam that shows that, independent ambulation is impossible without a walker. I think that person is likely to be awarded without a lawyer right here. I think it's reasonable for anyone to apply on their own without a lawyer for these two stages, mostly because there's not a lot a lawyer can do. But when you get here, I think you're going to be denied if you don't get a lawyer. So it's a pretty formal process, and you have to prepare for it. There are mistakes you can make if you do it on your own. So anyway, that's my opinion. And while I'm on the subject, how do lawyers get paid? They get paid, but it's very highly regulated by the Social Security Administration, such that there's basically only one way to do it. And it's kind of a take it or leave it deal for both the lawyer and the client. And it's 25% of back benefits up to a statutory cap of $7,200. So you'll recall that I said that a lot of times, not necessarily, but a lot of times people who are awarded here will get paid all the way back here. So sometimes that's $20,000 to $40,000 in back pay. And so 25% of that back pay would be sent to a lawyer up to that maximum of $7,200. And they actually, when they do their job right, Social Security, they send one check to the lawyer and one check, of course, the larger check to the claimant or the person trying to get disability benefits. And so, it's really not money out of your pocket if and it just comes out of the back benefits if they're successful. So in case the person who asked that question is wondering also about how they would pay for a lawyer, it's a contingency fee.
And we will put your phone number in the chat as well as in the follow-up email that we send out. But if folks are looking for a lawyer, do you have any tips on things to look for or avoid?
People who do it routinely are the people you should probably get involved. I do this, fortunately. I'm very privileged to be able to do this nationally because it's administrative law. If I'm licensed in one state, I can do this in any state. So to find someone in your state isn't necessary. Sometimes the various lawyers have working, or are known in a certain area. It might be an advantage in some cases if they're known by the judges and have a good relationship. There's a group called NOSCR, and I can't exactly remember what that stands for. It's something like National Organization of Social Security Representatives. And they can provide a list of names to people who ask about their members, who are usually specialized in this area.
Excellent. What things are needed to be prepared for the process to avoid delays?
Right. So the best time to think about it is before here, right? Before you even apply, to try to make sure that if you're working, that your workplace struggles are discussed at office visits. What particularly is difficult? Is it difficult to keep up pace? Are you making mistakes? Are you having trouble just making it through the 8 hours due to fatigue? Are you wanting to trying to take naps? All those things I suggested, that would be part of making sure your medical record is in the best shape possible as you go through this process. That is what I consider to be the key to a Social Security claim. As I said a few times already, the truth is not what matters here, it's the medical record.
And what financial information or records do people need to have handy when they start this process?
Nothing. They just need to, there are two programs administered by the Social Security Administration for people with disabilities, and I've only talked about one, SSDI, and that's for people with a work history. There's another program called SSI, and that's absurd that they're three of the same four letters, and it's a different program. It seems intentionally it seems like it might have been intended to confuse, but SSI is a welfare program, and you have to have virtually no assets to apply for SSI. So married people or people who have a work history and have some savings are not going to be eligible. So Social Security will do an evaluation of your assets if you're applying for SSI. But for SSDI, how much money you have is irrelevant. I mean, technically, a billionaire could apply for SSDI benefits, and that doesn't matter. It's just not part of it. So you don't need any financial information. If you haven't, if you have not worked over the last 5 years or have worked only inconsistently over the last 5 years, it's a good idea to call Social Security to find out if you're eligible for benefits, because you don't know whether you've paid enough Social Security taxes recently enough. Rather than that, there are no financial requirements for SSDI.
I'm seeing a general neurologist presently. Would seeing an MS specialist help in the long run?
Well, medical issues aside, right? Because that's really, of course, what you're looking for in a neurologist. But aside from that expertise in choosing a disease-modifying therapy, it doesn't matter for purposes of disability if your general neurologist is doing a really good job charting for purposes of disability. I don't think you're necessarily better off in one place than the other.
And do you need to be a certain number on the EDSS score to
No,
apply?
Social Security doesn't know what that means. That's just a research tool. So what matters, though, again, is whether your limitations are reflected, like how far you can walk. Do you need a walker? And some of these would correlate with the EDSS, but again, Social Security is not going to know what that means. So what matters is the extent to which your limitations are documented, the things you can't do.
Can medical records from an investigational study be used for a disability claim?
Great question. I don't know if this is somebody I'm working with currently because it's recently come up for me. Somebody did have it with a private disability claim that was denied because they had been getting care through a clinical trial protocol. So there was an absence of medical records when the private disability company requested medical records. It looked like the person hadn't been seen for a year. So it did require sort of extra steps in proving that you are getting care, and that you do have significant limitations. And so what we wound up doing was getting the study coordinator to try to get some of the records together from the clinical trial and have those sent over. Yes, it can create snags, but nothing that you can't overcome if you're aware of the problem. So very insightful question.
If one applies for and successfully receives SSDI, can early withdrawals be taken from a 401k or an IRA without penalty?
Yes. So that's one of the two ways. So if Social Security finds you disabled, in most cases, that'll be enough to allow you to access your retirement funds without penalty. But there's another way to do it, and that is to call the administrator of your 401k, like Schwab or whoever, and find out what forms are needed to prove disability. And so you don't have to necessarily go through Social Security. That's one of the ways to do it. But I think you can do it directly in most cases just by having your neurologist fill out forms indicating the nature of your symptoms and limitations.
We have a few more situational type questions. If you have had MS for 5 years, you're 32 years old, are you disqualified from your company's long-term disability and life insurance?
Probably not. I've seen it. So broadly speaking, I can tell you the difference between, I can tell you Social Security's rules because you can look it up. But once you start getting into private disability benefits, they're contracts and very unique to different situations. At least when you start working for a company, You should be eligible to purchase the disability benefits, the private disability benefits, and it's a very good idea to do that, as I've mentioned earlier. I did know of a case where, where people have purchased, like during the enrollment period, they've been able to get disability benefits. Again, MS in that example would be a pre-existing condition for at least 12 months, again, depending on the policy, but then it would go away. But I've also seen people who were unable to purchase during the disability insurance during the open enrollment period, and it was really a one-time opportunity for them to get it when they started their job. So I think the answer is it depends. But if it's possible, it's a great idea to get it, of course. Let me spend a minute on why, because so a lot of the problems with Social Security relate to the delay, and even if given what I do for a living, helping people appeal their private disability benefits that have been denied, even given that, I'm not cynical. Mostly the private disability insurance companies pay right away when they're supposed to, meaning after 2 weeks instead of after 2 years. And so that's one of the reasons it's such an important idea. It's such a good idea to buy a policy if available. The other issue is the amount of money involved for high earners is significantly different. Often the private disability companies pay 60% of your salary. So if you imagine $100,000 a year salary, right, that's $60,000 a year, $5,000 a month. And even at the high end, Social Security is $3,000 a month. And while I'm at it, you don't get both. Most plans through people's employer have an offset for Social Security. So if you're getting, in that example, $5,000 a month, and then you begin to get $3,000 from Social Security, the private disability company will pay the difference, the $2,000 in that example. So the total would be $5,000 also, but it's a lot more, right, for people who have higher salaries to have a lot more money potentially if they become disabled and they have long-term disability. Also, a lot of times that money from the long-term disability policy is tax-free. So 60% tax-free comes pretty close to the whole salary, right? And then the definition of disability is often different, always different, I think. The most policies, private disability policies, will pay you at least for a period of time if you become unable to do your own job. So if you have a cognitively demanding job, like a nurse, for example, there's no additional question, as Social Security asks, are there other jobs you can do in the national economy? It's just, can you do your own job? And then you can get recovery much more quickly and usually for much more money. So I kind of carried on there because it's such an important topic.
So then I think this flows into this question of, can I be on short or long-term disability through my job while applying for disability through Social Security?
Yes. And not only can you, but mostly a private disability company, when we have private disability insurance through your employer, once they start paying you long-term disability insurance, presumably, then they're going to say, well, as a condition of continued receipt of your income, you need to apply for Social Security. So you can't require that you get it, but they can and do require that you apply. And again, it's in your interest to do so, but it's not always obvious why, because you're not necessarily going to get more income, but you will get Medicare, and there are other advantages too that are a little complicated to explain right now.
You gave a lot of great examples of limitations that fatigue or mobility issues may place on someone. Can you give some examples for like neuropathy?
Neuropathy, like
yes.
the pain presumably?
Yes.
So, yeah, so the pain is so severe that I can't do anything productively. I just need to lay down in a quiet room and hopefully, until it improves, right? So what would be, I can't concentrate. or otherwise be productive, I'd be off task. Is how I would think about that one.
What happens if
On that, it's surprising. I'm sorry,
Go
Kelsey.
ahead.
Surprisingly important to be more specific than that. So, how often is the pain so intense that you can't concentrate? Is it a period of hours every day? If so, that's be critical to include that also. Sorry, back to you, Kelsey.
Thank you. What happens if you have long-term disability insurance through work, but you lose your job related to performance, related to MS? So then you no longer have the disability insurance because of your MS.
Great question. Thank you. Apply as soon as you can. You're in a better position, I think, to apply for benefits, disability benefits, while you're still working, and that you were the one who initiates it. But sometimes it happens where people are blindsided. They don't realize that their work is subpar, or that they don't know that their employer notices it, and so they would wind up losing their job. Yes, you can apply for benefits, but you definitely need help in that situation. I would recommend getting a lawyer to help in that situation, because the argument is no longer, oh, I'm disabled today. The argument is, I was disabled when they fired me, and because your insurance protects you, of course, only while you're employed, but that doesn't mean necessarily you can't apply afterwards. Sometimes policies will say you only have 3 months or something like that, but definitely apply, and the sooner the better.
Do you recommend LTC insurance?
I don't know enough about it, so long-term care insurance, that is what protects people in the event they lose the ability to live independently and would need a nursing home or in-home support. And if you have MS and you have an opportunity to get it, then it seems like a good idea generally to me, but it's a little bit outside of my expertise, and I admit that's not a very well substantiated opinion.
Could medical records from your general practitioner or your PCP be used to help support a disability claim?
So what's the first part? From your primary
GP or your PCP?
Yes, definitely it can. So the more the merrier. Hopefully everyone's records show the challenges you have. Yes, it's it's better that the person, if that person's treating you, then their opinion should be given some weight.
Why does disability stop when you turn 65?
Okay, thanks. Another good question. So it does. I don't think of it that way. I think of it continues. They just call it something else. They call it retirement benefits. But that's what Social Security disability benefits are. They're early retirement benefits. So it's your full retirement benefit early, and then it's just an accounting, to my way of thinking. They just call the benefit that will continue Social Security retirement benefits now. I hope that's...
Yeah. The next question, we have 2 questions left, so if anyone has any more to throw in right before we end, I'll give that warning. Next question is it not illegal to fire you when you have MS?
It is not illegal to fire someone who has MS. That's easy. Much more complicated question is, what if did you identify, does the employer know that you have MS, and did they give you, did they go through the so-called iterative process required by the Americans with Disabilities Act to see if there's a way to accommodate it, or your challenges? And if it's a bigger employer, did they have other jobs that they could have asked you, they could have set up for you? So that's a little outside my area too. That's more of an employment. I'm getting into employment law, which I don't know as much about, but certainly you can fire someone with MS. I know that's really not the way the question was intended legally, but but there are other more subtle issues about how they did it and whether they gave you an opportunity to find accommodations.
And I'll use this time to refer to another reference that we have on our YouTube channel, on our website. We have a website or a webinar from an organization called the Job Accommodation Network. So if you think you're struggling in your job and there are accommodations that you would like to be made, that's a great organization and a great resource to start exploring what some of those accommodations could be. And I think that website or webinar is just called Job Accommodation Network. Oh gosh, I can't remember the title at the moment. Tom refers to it though in his legal tools for helping people stay in the workforce video, which we will include in the follow-up and link in the description below. And then the final question, the Colorado Medicaid buyout program says that it's for working adults. Is there a way to qualify if you retire before 65?
Yes. So the Colorado's Medicaid buy-in program is an incredible tool for people who need in-home services. So if Social Security has found you disabled, you're an adult with a disability, and then to qualify for the Medicaid buy-in program, you need to be a working adult with a disability. And so the question is, what's working mean in that context? And when I last looked into this pretty recently, there's no minimum threshold to be considered to be a working adult with a disability. In other words, if you're making $10 a week opening the mail for your spouse, you may be considered working such that you'd be eligible for benefit for the Medicaid buy-in program. And also, of course, the Medicaid buy-in program allows people to get Medicaid too, in addition to the sometimes even bigger benefit of the Medicaid buy-in program, which is in-home services.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tom, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for your fabulous questions.
Yeah, really, they were great. Thank you.
The webinar is archived on mscenter.org. And then please make sure to sign up for our mailing list so you can hear about future opportunities, as well as take that evaluation survey that we'll also include in the follow-up email and the description. So thank you, everyone.
Bye.